There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. You know it. It lives somewhere behind your eyes. It is the weight of watching yourself, again, do the exact thing you said you wouldn't do. Eat what you swore you'd avoid. Open what you promised you'd close. Say what you rehearsed not saying. Return to what you spent weeks leaving. It's not laziness. Lazy people don't feel this. Lazy people don't lie awake reconstructing the moment it went wrong, running the tape backward, looking for the frame where they could have chosen differently. You feel this because you are trying, and the trying keeps failing. That is the first thing the Stoics would tell you, if they were honest about what their philosophy actually demands. They would not start with a rule. They would start with a question most people spend their entire lives refusing to answer. What exactly is the structure that keeps producing this result? The structure, the invisible architecture inside you that processes every moment and decides, before your conscious mind finishes the thought, what you will reach for, what you will avoid, and what you will tell yourself about both. Most people never examine this. They attack the behavior and call that self-improvement. They download the app, they set the alarm, they write the goal in the journal with the leather cover. The architecture underneath remains untouched, intact, patient. It waits. Because architecture doesn't respond to motivation. It doesn't care about your intentions. It processes inputs and produces outputs according to its own logic, a logic built not from your values, but from your history, from the 10,000 small moments you chose comfort over cost, from the patterns so old you have mistaken them for personality. That's just who I am. No, that is what the architecture has decided to show you about yourself. There is a difference. You cannot discipline a broken architecture. You have to rebuild it. This is not a script about motivation. Motivation is weather. It comes, it leaves, unreliable as a foundation for anything permanent. This is a script about structure. About the 10 principles the Stoics embedded in their philosophy, not as inspirational ideas, but as load-bearing walls. Rules, yes, but not the kind you tape to your mirror. The kind that, once internalized, make certain choices structurally impossible. Not because you are resisting them, but because the architecture no longer produces them as options. Epictetus, a man born a slave, who had his leg broken by his owner as a demonstration of power, who built one of the most formidable minds in recorded history from inside a circumstance most people would use as permanent justification for collapse, did not ask you to understand your past. He asked you what you were going to do with the next moment. That question is still open. These 10 rules are the Stoics' answer to it. Not delivered as comfort, delivered as architecture. Receive them that way. Rule 1. Identify what you actually control. Then defend it like territory. The Stoics built their entire philosophy on a distinction that sounds simple and functions like a demolition charge when applied correctly. Things within your control. Your judgments, your responses, your attention, the next action you choose, things outside it, everything else. Most people build their entire emotional infrastructure around the second category. They spend their cognitive resources, attention, worry, anger, hope, on variables they cannot move, and then they wonder why they feel powerless. They have assigned their power to things that were never capable of receiving it. That is the pattern. Every time you feel the pull toward a behavior you cannot control, the obsessive checking, the replaying, the anger at an outcome that has already closed, stop. Not to breathe. To ask one question. Is this in my control? If yes, act. If no, release it. Not because you don't care, because holding it is a structural drain on everything you are trying to build. Every unit of energy spent on what you cannot control is stolen directly from what you can. This is Rule 1, because nothing else functions without it. Rule 2. Your emotional reaction is not the truth. It is a draft. Epictetus wrote, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things." Read that again, slowly. The thing that happened, the message, the opportunity, the person who chose differently, that thing is neutral. The emotional charge is applied by your interpretation. by the story your architecture generates in the milliseconds between event and response. Most people treat this interpretation as reality. They say, "That made me angry," as though the anger was embedded in the event and simply transferred to them. It wasn't. The Stoics demanded that you examine the draft before you publish it. Look at your interpretation and ask, is this accurate? Is this the only available reading of what just happened? You are not suppressing the emotion. You are auditing the thought that created it. The reactor is controlled by the architecture they were handed. The responder is building a new one. In every charged moment, they refuse to publish the first draft. Rule 3. Stop negotiating with yourself. The negotiation is the addiction. There is a voice. You know it. It arrives at the exact moment of decision. It is reasonable. It is articulate. It has evidence. It says, "Just this once. You've been good. This doesn't count. Tomorrow you start clean. You deserve this." This voice is not your enemy. It is something more dangerous. It is you. It is the part of your architecture that has learned, through years of successful negotiation, that if it simply argues long enough, it wins. And it does, almost every time. The Stoics had a word for the discipline required here, ascesis, practice. Specifically, the practice of doing the hard thing without deliberation, not because deliberation is wrong, but because some decisions, if reopened, have already been lost. Marcus Aurelius kept a list, not of goals, of decisions already made, so that when the moment arrived, the answer was not a choice. It was an execution. The negotiation is the addiction, not the substance, not the behavior, not the distraction. The internal debate itself has become the mechanism of avoidance. As long as you are deliberating, you are not doing. The architecture rewards the delay. Close the negotiation before it opens. Decide once, then execute. The voice will scream. That is confirmation you are doing it correctly. Rule 4. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that the work has begun. The modern nervous system has been trained, by design, by market forces, by the accumulated weight of 1,000 frictionless interfaces, to interpret discomfort as malfunction. You feel resistance. Something is wrong. You feel boredom. Something is wrong. You feel the friction of difficult work. Something is wrong. And so you smooth it. You reach for the thing that removes the texture, the scroll, the snack, the distraction with better lighting. The discomfort disappears. The architecture records this, files it, strengthens the pathway. Next time, the threshold is lower. The reach is faster. The Stoics did not seek suffering. This is a persistent misreading of their philosophy. But they understood, with an unflinching clarity that most people will spend their lives avoiding, that the capacity to sit inside discomfort without fleeing it is not a bonus feature of a strong character. It is the foundation. Everything else is built on it. Discipline, focus, relationships that can hold weight, decisions made from principle rather than pain avoidance, all of it rests on the ability to feel the friction and remain. Stop interpreting discomfort as malfunction. It is the signal that the architecture is being stressed, and stressed architecture, if you do not flee it, becomes stronger. That is the structure. You already knew all 4 of these. Rule 5. Build identity before you build habits. Every system of behavioral change that fails does so for the same reason. It tries to change the action without changing the story. I am someone trying to eat better, and every meal is a fight against the older, louder identity, the one that says you eat for comfort, for reward, for escape. The habit battle is never about the habit. It is about which identity wins the narrative. Identity decides. Behavior follows, not the other way around. Never the other way around. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up and ask himself what he should do. He asked what a philosopher king would do. He constructed the identity first. The behavior followed, not from motivation, but from internal consistency. Behavior does not build identity. Identity permits behavior. Decide who you are in the process of becoming, not who you want to be. Who you are choosing to be, right now, under construction, in the specific conditions of today. Then let every small decision answer to that. Rule 6. Remove the choice. Architecture over willpower. Willpower is a depleting resource. Epictetus did not advise his students to try harder in the moment of temptation. He advised them to construct conditions in which the temptation had no point of entry. This is the most practical rule in Stoic philosophy, and it is the least discussed because it is not inspiring. It does not make for a compelling story of heroic resistance. It makes for a quiet life of structural prevention. Remove the thing from the environment. Change the sequence. Introduce friction between the impulse and the action. Not because you don't trust yourself, because you understand that trust is irrelevant when the architecture is compromised. The person who keeps the bottle in the house and relies on willpower to ignore it is playing a losing game, not because they are weak, but because they have misunderstood the playing field. You do not win by resisting. You win by designing a context in which resistance is rarely required. Rule 7. Practice voluntary discomfort before it becomes involuntary. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. But they also practiced something more physical, voluntary exposure to the conditions they feared. Seneca lived in luxury, and periodically he chose to eat like a slave, to sleep on a hard surface, to wear rough clothing, not as punishment, not as performance, as practice. The question he was answering was not, "Can I endure hardship?" It was, "Am I still free if the comfort is removed?" Most people do not know the answer. They have never tested it, and so the comfort is not a reward. It is a leash. A soft one, but a leash. They cannot function without the routine, the temperature, the signal that things are normal. The Stoics called this slavery with a pleasant face. Voluntary discomfort is calibration, the practice of demonstrating, to yourself before anyone else, that the architecture holds under conditions that are not optimal, that the identity survives the removal of the props. That is the decision. Rule 8. Your attention is the most valuable thing you own. Act accordingly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present," not as a mindfulness technique, as a survival instruction for someone who understood, at the molecular level, what it cost to have your attention colonized by what had already happened or what had not happened yet. The past is a record. You cannot edit it. The future is a projection. You cannot inhabit it. The present is the only location where your attention produces a result. And yet the modern architecture has been built, deliberately, expensively, by people who profit from it, to ensure your attention is never fully here. Always pulled backward into regret or forward into anxiety. Always partially elsewhere. Reclaim your attention as territory, with the brutal, constant practice of asking, "Where is my mind right now, and is that where it needs to be?" Every time you bring it back, you are doing construction work. Every time you let it drift, the old structure reasserts itself. The choice happens dozens of times per hour. It is never a small choice. Rule 9. The opinion of others is a currency you cannot afford to spend yourself on. Epictetus spent years as a slave. No legal personhood, no property, no rights enforceable by any institution. And he was free. Not metaphorically, structurally free. In the only way the Stoics recognized as real, his internal judgments were his own. His values were his own. No external condition, including ownership of his body, could reach inside and rewrite that. Most people who cannot control themselves are operating inside a cage built from other people's perception. They eat to manage what others think of their body. They work to manage what others think of their ambition. They perform discipline when observed and collapse when alone, because the discipline was never theirs. It was always a performance for an audience. Real control is what happens at 2 a.m. when no one is watching. In the moment of decision, when there is no social consequence either way, when the choice is made purely between you and the architecture you have been building, who are you in that moment? What you do when no one is watching is who you are. Build that person, not the version designed for observation. Rule 10. Progress is not a feeling, it is a record. The Stoics journaled, not for therapy, not for self-expression, for audit. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations as a private document, a ledger of his own conduct examined against his own standards. No audience assumed, no performance. A person holding themselves accountable to a philosophy they had chosen, measuring the distance between the ideal and the actual, without self-pity or self-congratulation. Feeling progress is unreliable. The architecture is designed to make avoidance feel like rest, and regression feel like self-care. You cannot trust your feelings as instruments of measurement. They are participants in the system you are trying to change. What you can trust is a record, not elaborate. A simple, honest accounting. What did I do today that was consistent with who I am building? What was not? No judgment, no motivation, just the record. Over time, the record becomes evidence. And evidence, accumulated, undeniable yours, is the most powerful structural material available to a person rebuilding from the inside out. Keep the record. Read it without flinching. Let it be the only mirror that counts. 10 rules. No ambiguity in the logic, no softness in the delivery. And here is what no productivity framework will say out loud. Knowing 10 rules has never changed a single life. What changes a life is the moment a person stops using knowledge as a substitute for decision. The moment the reading ends and the building begins. Not tomorrow, not when circumstances are more favorable. Now, in the specific, unglamorous conditions of the present moment, which will never be exactly right and which is the only moment that has ever existed. The Stoics were not optimists. They believed in human agency, cold, demanding, non-negotiable, and they believed that every person capable of understanding these ideas was also capable of practicing them. Not perfectly, not without failure, but consistently, structurally, with the kind of quiet, accumulating commitment that produces a different person over years rather than a better feeling over hours. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire, buried children, managed a body in chronic pain, and sat down privately without audience and held himself to his own standard. Not because it felt good, because it was the only life he was willing to inhabit. These rules are not a system, they are a mirror. And most people, when they finally see themselves clearly in it, understand exactly what needs to change, and change nothing. Not because they don't know, because knowing, for most people, is enough to feel like doing. Tomorrow morning, before the phone, before the noise, before you construct today's version of yourself for external consumption, there will be a moment, small, unglamorous, no audience. Who you are in that moment is the only answer that has ever mattered. The Stoics knew this. You know this. The question is whether you will still know it when it costs something. Most people won't. Not because they don't understand, because they do.